Hi, friends, fellow evolvers, and curious people everywhere. Welcome to this episode of Being with Sally Wilson. I'm Sally Wilson, and I have with me as a very exceptional special guest today, Karen Brooks. Welcome, Karen.
Oh, thank you, Sally. Thanks so much for having me.
And I know probably as I said that stuff because you're just that kind of girl. Saying that you're exceptional and extraordinary is probably very uncomfortable for you. But let me just give listeners and watchers an indication of why I say that. Apart from the fact that this woman is incredibly humble, she's also a best-selling author, has been a columnist, had a military career, an academic career. Goodness, what else? You've been described by many different people in the most extraordinary terms as well, Karen, and I've read some of those descriptions. Can you just give us some indication of how all the different facets of your career and life so far have kind of come into being and happened?
Yeah, it's sort of strange, isn't it? I never planned to, have this kind of career, and it sort of was organic in one way. Sort of, you could say it evolved, maybe it devolved. Who knows? But, I basically, all my life, wanted to be an actress as a young woman, and didn't get into NIDA, which is the big National Institute of Dramatic Art in Sydney, and as a consequence, joined the army, probably, well, to please my father, really. So I was an officer for 5 years and left when I had children, because back then you weren't really encouraged to stay. That's all changed now, thank goodness. And realised I had no qualifications and nothing to recommend me except motherhood and wife, I guess, and I wanted a bit more than that. So I went back to uni and found I loved it. So I had tried uni on for size when I was younger and didn't suit. So I liked it so much I stayed, got a PhD, and ended up being an academic for 20, 25 years. And as an academic, part of what you do is write. They say publish or perish. And of course, to be published, you have to write something. Yeah. So I was doing what you do as part of your career as well as teach, which is to research and write in your area. And I think I need to feed the creative side of my brain. It wasn't enough to just, nurture the knowledge side. Though creativity is knowledge too. But also I think it was an awareness that you spend years writing a piece that's maybe 5,000 words in some obscure academic journal, and 3 people read it. And I needed to do something a bit more than that. So I was also writing for a newspaper at the same time, which I loved. And I loved the discipline of that. It's very different to academic writing, broader audience, immediate feedback, some of it really challenging, and began writing creatively. And so they were side by side. They weren't one after the other. I think people forget that lots of people do that. We're not just one thing. We're complex, and we often do many, many things simultaneously. And I certainly did professionally quite a few things. So, and in the end, writing took over. Yeah.
Yeah. So you say it's taken over. Now, you've been a successful author for 20 years, and your books often, I mean, I've looked at a lot of the characters in your books, and it seems to me that a lot of them are women challenging the norm. Can you just speak to that a little bit?
Sure. The historical fiction, well, I wrote historical fantasy to start with, but then the historical fiction. And one of the biggest fictions about history, and particularly about women in history, is that they didn't challenge the norms. They weren't present in history. For years and years and years, we know history is written by the victors. Well, the victors in this instance was also patriarchy and men. Women were denied access to education. They weren't able to be in the public sphere in really any way for centuries. So their voices are often absent, but just because their voices were absent doesn't mean they weren't present and they didn't contribute. And of course, as an academic, I was learning more and more about that. I'm a feminist, and very happy to say that. It's funny, for a while there it became the new F word, and I think it's been grossly maligned and misunderstood. But I'm a feminist, and I was very interested in women's contribution and to history, to society. So when I started writing history, I particularly was interested in women's roles. And yes, women, I guess, forging their own paths, which really means being able to make choices. And for centuries, women weren't allowed to make their own choices, even though some did. And I think that in the careers that I had, particularly the early careers, they were very male-dominated environments too.
Yes.
So, it might be easy to think that in some ways the experiences were similar to those in the past, and they were. And yet I chose those careers, and that's the difference. I was free as a woman to make choices to go into the army, to become an academic, to do other things. And yes, I hit glass ceilings, I hit walls, I came across men who felt women had no place being there. But I certainly didn't experience what women of the past did. Sorry, now I've lost track of the question.
No, that's all right. We love tangents here. But and also a lot of women of the present, depending on where people are living and the sorts of cultures that they're living in.
Yeah.
So yes, we are very fortunate in our
that's
society.
right. Women are still denied choices. You're right. You've got to look at that. There's a whole range of things about economic situation. And in fact, a lot of my books focus on women's economic empowerment. That's still a great reality for many women today, but also religion, cultural backgrounds, colour of their skin even.
Yeah.
And I remember watching a program the other day on, can I say where it was? Prime, one of the streaming services. And it's fabulous, actually. It's Jack Ryan, which I really like. I like the action adventure stuff. But a character in that says geography is destiny. And another character mocks him for saying that, but I actually thought it was really profound. And there's such a truth to that. One has to only look at what's happening over in, Iran and Syria, but even America with the laws that have recently been overturned and the abortion laws,
Yes.
So yes, you're right. Women are still having choices taken from them or were never given them in the first place. So even though I write history, I find it resonates in ways I wish it didn't today.
Yeah, I know this, something Ruth Bader Ginsburg said, and I'm going to completely mess this up now, but effectively she was saying she doesn't expect special treatment. She would just ask that the boot be lifted from her neck, the foot be lifted from her neck so that she can be as free as men are and men were in her situation. Yeah.
Yeah. And there's a real truth to that too. But I think too, and certainly in my books and certainly in my own life, I've also worked alongside decent human beings, male and female, that have shared their knowledge, shared their ability to raise you, and elevate you to be a better person, a better worker, better in your profession. And, I think I owe a lot. What I've accomplished, if they are indeed accomplishments, is due to those people. You do really stand on the shoulder of giants, and I think their sex doesn't matter sometimes. I have this rule that I don't care where you're from, what your sex is or anything, just don't be an ass, Be a kind person, then I'll let you into my life. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah. And you touched on women's economic or financial empowerment. With the sort of work, some of the sort of work that I do, I see money often used as a means of control. Could you just talk to that a little bit? Because I think so often that creeps into relationships. It's often a part of people's conditioning to the point where they don't notice it.
That's so true. And particularly, again, in the past where women didn't have the right to work and earn. Well, actually, they did work. They've always worked, whether it was within the domestic sphere, but very often they helped in businesses. But even to this day and age, I've had my own experience of that to a degree. I really have to be careful how I talk about this, but in my first marriage, there was, I had a lot of, how do I put it? I guess, a lot of power taken away from me, or choice taken away from me. And one of those was economic choices. And I was made to really feel that. And I know when I was a single mother, and I can really empathise with lots of single parents out there and how hard it is. And the stigma that's still attached to single parenthood, whether it's as a consequence of a failed relationship or through choice, there is still stigma attached to it. And I think now, you know, that there are still genuine struggles, and people that rely on the government for assistance too, the way they're labelled and stigmatised is just appalling. And, you know, and then again, that falls upon the children too, often in these situations as well. So this is something that's still ongoing and really needs to change. And it's quite terrifying when you read through history what happened. And I think, you know, if a woman from, say, the 1400s, 1600s, whatever, could suddenly appear today, and she'd be astonished and in total wonderment at what's going on, but I think deeply saddened that there was still so much that hadn't changed, hadn't altered.
Well, that just gave me goosebumps.
Yeah.
So, Karen, you put yourself out there and your opinions out there, and certainly when you're, you know, writing columns and all that sort of stuff, and on TV, you know, you've put yourself out there, and you have dared to challenge, to question, publicly question stuff that's going on. And I'm really curious, firstly, whether you feel fear when you're considering expressing your opinions, or in the past when you've considered expressing your opinions. And if so, how you have, I guess, stepped forward anyway. What your relationship with fear is, because, you know, we touched on just in our introduction just how strongly people have described you. I mean,
yeah, I know.
in ways that I would consider actually unkind, inappropriate, horrible. So how do you deal with that?
Yeah, I'll just add to that. I've had death threats and everything. I mean, some people will be listening going, Karen, who? I wrote for a major masthead for 18 years. So, yeah, and I was on TV a lot, you're right. And I was afraid all the time. I was fearful. What I was fearful of more than anything was not being taken seriously. And but I forced myself to stand up. And one of the reasons that I did that was because I only ever commented on things I felt I was qualified to comment on.
Right.
If I was asked to comment on something that I had no knowledge about, I would redirect the media person, whoever, to someone who I felt was eminently more qualified than me.
Yeah.
My biggest fear was that someone who had no qualifications or no experience or no knowledge. And again, just because you've experienced something doesn't necessarily mean you're knowledgeable about it. You're knowledgeable about it from your own perspective. Academics try to look at the bigger picture. So I like to think that's what I was doing. So I was always fearful, but I think you just forge ahead. You just go ahead. I'll tell you a little something though. I get terrible nerve rashes always. Even now I have one. So I usually always wear high neck clothing when I was on TV, when I appeared in public, or on TV you wear lots of makeup. So the makeup person would often, if I had a bit of a lower neckline, would do my decolletage, you know, to hide any of the burn that would appear. And I know lots of people that fear that. Now, I'm not saying I'm a hero. What I'm going to say, I'm thinking about people who demonstrate real courage and bravery. They always feel fear. And that's the definition of a hero or heroine, isn't it? It's someone who feels fear but forges on nonetheless, and usually selflessly. Commenting isn't courageous or anything. You do put yourself out there. And yes, I've been called so many things, some of them really terrible. And as I said, I've received death threats. I used to have things sent to me in the mail where they cut out my column out of a newspaper and they defaced it so angrily they'd torn it, but they still saw fit to put it in an envelope with a stamp. Now, I've kept some of those things. I've kept some of the emails. I also received some nice ones, but I crashed websites because of my people responding. Some of the more fun things I was called was a 6'2" transvestite Sheila on national television. My response to that was, well, I'm only 5'10". And also a left-wing loopy academic with no testosterone. And they were the lightest sort of things that members of the public would feed back. But you have to do it. I was given a platform that very few, it was a privilege and it was humbling. And so I tried to do it with integrity and honesty and not for the publicity.
Yes.
But I do worry sometimes now that that's not what's happening. And I worry about opinion being offered as expertise.
Yes.
And I think everyone's entitled to their opinion. It doesn't make you right.
Yeah.
And not that academics or people who, have spent years in a particular profession and are well qualified to comment on it aren't always right either. But I'd rather someone like that than someone who's just, hauled in quickly because they're a celebrity or maybe a journalist who covers lots of stories and asked to give their expert opinion on something. I guess there is expert opinion and there's opinion, but again, there's often the line's very blurry.
And I've found that the sort of the public attention I've received is much less than you have. But it's sort of during my opera career, every now and again you'd find out that the person doing the reviews came straight across from the culinary department and actually didn't know anything about music, or and so I learned very quickly not to take the good ones or the bad ones seriously. And interestingly, what I found is that the people who really knew a lot were humble and kind. They may have had some criticism, but it was expressed in a considerate way because they knew how hard it is. They get it.
Yeah, it's constructive criticism. There is such a thing as constructive criticism. I mean, you see it as an author because reviewers and everybody now can review and put it out there on various platforms. And I really value what they have to say, but some people are really unkind and cruel. They'll find one typo in your book, so they'll write it off, not understanding that many, many eyes have looked at that book and you just don't see that error. And I hate it when that happens. And yes, they're right, that error is there, but you don't need to dismiss 2 years' work on the basis of one spelling error or typo, probably. And you're right. And the people who are writers of any ilk are often much kinder and generous and very constructive and helpful in their criticism. I review books and I refuse to review one I don't like, because that's personal taste usually. So I try to only review books that I really find entertaining and across or interesting or challenging across a range of genres, and try to only see the positive in them. And that's because from experience, I know it can crush you, those negative reviews. And you're right, you shouldn't look at them. But I have my agent, my publishers saying, don't read the reviews. I mean, fortunately, they're mostly good. But do you remember those? No, you remember the one asshole who wrote the really awful review. And it doesn't matter how many people take you to heart and love it. You just remember their scathing, cruel words that are often personal too,
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I remember seeing Brené Brown interviewed or something, and she was talking about comments made on her, the original TED Talk, I guess, that went viral.
Yes.
And exactly that. There were all these positive ones, but she remembers the horrible negative comment on her weight. And it was just, you're right. They're the ones that kind of stick with us.
I know. I'm so glad I'm not on TV anymore. I mean, I was still being asked even a couple of years later for various reasons. I gave it, or health reasons, actually. I gave away my academic career, and I was diagnosed with cancer and had a very bad health for quite a few years. I'm still coming out of it, but I am coming out of it. And I just couldn't do it. I just wasn't able to anymore. And I often look at men and women today, but particularly women, and how easy it is now to lash out and respond so quickly to something. But it's usually about, particularly with women, their appearance, what Brené Brown was saying, her weight, her outfit she's wearing. So I don't know why people think that's appropriate or helpful, or it's so unkind. And even when they're maybe saying, oh, she's beautiful, or she's this, or she's that, again, I think that person would rather you comment on the content of what or the job they've done, not the way they appear. And it's really interesting that still happens. It's happened again for centuries, that people have commented in the ways they could about women's appearances. It still happens. It reduces our value to a particular aesthetic thing. Yeah,
absolutely. And it's just sort of it's bizarre when you think that it's the one thing we don't have control over. I mean, yeah, sure, we can, choose crazy haircuts and stuff like that. But we look how we look.
Yeah.
I mean, whereas it's the rest of the expression of us that shows who we are.
Well, our way of being, it is far more important. And I really feel, particularly for young women who are so influenced by, social media, Instagram, TikTok, all those things, and they have all these impressions of what's valued and important in a woman. And again, it's really incumbent upon older generations to demonstrate through how they perform, I guess, how they are in the world, that there's a lot more to being a decent human being than just how you look. And let's face it, in the end, if we're lucky enough to live a long life, we all pretty much start to look the same. It's how we are and how we treat others that's remembered and is a point of difference,
I think Ash Barty is an extraordinary example of that.
Yeah.
Just being a good human being, and stating it, publicly, so everyone got it. It's more important to be a good human being than it is to be a good tennis player.
Totally. She's a wonderful role model. And there are so many out there. That's exactly it. There's so many great role models out there. And many of them are very big public people like Grace Tame and just marvelous role models. And and Greta Thunberg, I have a girl crush on all of them. I just think they're wonderful.
Yeah.
And how they keep going. Now that's courage. They work through fear. And fear of failure, I would suggest, might be their biggest one, their biggest fear too.
Yeah, just listening. So I'm a bit of a tennis fan, and listening to one of the commentators last night talk about, once you can overcome the fear of failure, then you're free to play your best tennis. And I can absolutely relate to that in my own career. Fear of failure, and for some people, failure is not being perfect.
Exactly.
Or not being the best.
Yeah. That's right. It's all relative, isn't it? Yeah.
All relative. Yeah. It's all, failure is hitting, one unforced error. Well, hello. It's going to happen. It doesn't matter how good you are. A close friend introduced me to a new word that she'd discovered or been told called flawsome.
Flawsome? Oh, I love it. I love it. That's
flawed and awesome. Yep.
Yeah, my hubby has this term where he says a perfect imperfection.
Yeah.
And just like being flawsome. That's beautiful.
Yeah.
The book I'm writing at the moment, there's a line in it where a young female writer talks about an older female writer who mentored her and says, she taught me to try and fail, try again and fail, but also succeed, of course, because by this time this writer has had her successes too. But it's, again, that thing of not being afraid of failing. And when we allow that to fell us, to stop us, then everyone else has won. All those who don't believe in us, all those who are, sending those awful tweets or messages or whatever and telling us we're hopeless, we're useless, we're ugly, we're fat, whatever, they think those barbs that will stick, then they've won. So, we have to keep trying. And I think even in any profession, the most successful are those people who work through failure and allow it to teach them not to make the same mistakes again. Though I was reading, I discovered a new word, and I'm not going to remember it, but you might, about the children of celebrities who get the leg up. What's the word again?
I don't know.
Starts with N. Does it start with N? A neep, a nope, or something? I can't remember.
Is it related to nepotism?
Yeah, a nepo.
Right, okay.
Yes.
A nepo.
A nepo, the child of a celebrity who's been given a leg up. So whether it's a child of a model, of an actor, of a musician, you name it, someone who's been given that leg up. And there's been a bit of a backlash against the children, these nepos, and some of them have hit back by acknowledging, yes, we did get maybe entree into this field in a way that's denied to others. But hell, we're also still working. And I think they're really respected and appreciated because it's still talent that will keep them there. They might get in the door, but it's talent that will keep them there. But those that are denying that their parents' status didn't give them that leg up, they're copying a backlash.
Yeah, and I can imagine where that's coming from too. Fear of actually not being enough. and
But you know,
not
luck
deserving
plays
it.
a good role too, and I think we have to remember that too. And I'd be lying if I didn't say luck played a role in a lot of what I've done as well. And um, I read books by self-published authors, and I can't understand how some I do, so how they're not published. They've really worked the book. They've had it professionally edited. The story's fantastic. And I can imagine it crossing the desk of a publisher and it's just not the right time. That genre isn't starring on the world literary stage at the moment. So it's pushed aside. And I really feel for those people, because in, 3 months later, if it had appeared, it might be picked up and be a bestseller. And it's the same with actors or performers that audition for a particular role. They're just not quite the right look, or the tone, or the wrong voice for it. And so luck does play a huge role.
It's luck. I find it such an interesting concept, such an interesting word. I mean, when I'm just thinking about the nepos, if I look back at what steered me towards music, well, you could call it luck the whole way. Luck that in my small country town, there happened to be a headmaster who valued music. There happened to be a woman who was qualified, who taught music, and who wanted to give up her lunchtimes to teach choir. And, you can sort of see where one thing led to the next. But it's also, like you said earlier, Karen, how you haven't sort of consciously thought, well, I'm going to do this, and then I'm going to do this, and then you've kind of let yourself move with what was happening and make your choices accordingly, haven't you? So there's a part of me that thinks, those people who don't get the roles or don't get published, and I can relate to all of that.
Me too.
I can relate to it. There's a part of me that thinks, maybe that just isn't where they're meant to go. And and again, it's just a bit of a philosophical kind of, call it woo-woo if you like, but I don't know. There's just a sense, well, perhaps their path is somewhere else, or that's an important part of their path is actually what we see as the rejection or the lack of success or whatever it is.
Yeah, I know. I hear what you're saying, and I hear also that when we say you've got to make your own luck, what that means really is you've got to put yourself in the right situations and work at what you want, And I get really frustrated with some of the platitudes, like, oh, they didn't dream hard enough, or just dream it and you'll be it. No, that's bullshit. You've got to work at something, and you've got to work hard and take it seriously. It just won't magically rain and fall on you. And yes, I did. My careers did evolve, but I also put myself in the right situation for those things to happen and encountered the right people. For you, yes, school was lucky because you couldn't control who was your teacher or headmaster, and that was fortuitous or luck. But I know that, and I was lucky when I returned to uni as a mature student. One of my lecturers happened to be a fabulous medieval historian who later went to become Australia's leading fantasy novelist, and we became really close friends. And she was my inspiration, my aspiration, but also just a really good human being. And we loved each other dearly. I credit a lot of where I am now because of her, not because she forged the path that I then trod, is the way to put it. She didn't open doors for me necessarily, though there probably was a little bit of that too, and shoved me through it. Because I kept saying, I'm going to write a novel. And one day she got so fed up with me, she said, I'll stop saying you're gonna and just do it. And best advice I ever got. And so I am a great believer in working hard for something and being resilient when you do have those rejections. And that's where the dreaming and the believing comes into it. Believe in yourself, hone your talents, turn to experts that can help you sharpen them. Do those courses, talk to people in the profession you want to go into, or that have the experiences that you think you want to have too, and learn from the masters and mistresses. Gather the knowledge and the expertise towards you.
Yeah, that striving for excellence is of huge satisfaction itself, isn't it? The sense of mastery of something, and the striving, just the I was going to say the attitude of striving, but it's also, for so many high achievers and people who do strive, it's kind of letting go of all the baggage and the loading and the burdens and the I'm not good enough and I'm never good enough and blah, 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 letting go of that so you can actually enjoy it. Right.
It's funny you should say that, Sally, because I inadvertently, without meaning to do what happened, tweeted something, no, Insta something yesterday, and it goes on my official Facebook page as well, the author page. And what it was a girlfriend in Sydney who's really lovely and very successful in her own right, saw my book, my last book, on a staff pick shelf in a bookshop in Leichhardt in Sydney. And she's kindly sent it to me, and I was feeling so down about the book I'm currently copy editing, which comes out later this year, for various reasons. And I love it with a passion, and I'm so afraid of failing my readers, that they're not going to love it, and just starting to think it's crap. I find I get quite crippled by self-doubt. And it was such a pick-me-up to get her little message and the photos. And I said, can I please put these up on social media? And she said, sure. So I wrote something like, just when I was feeling down and thinking my book was crap, my next book was crap, look what my darling friends sent me. And all these people started saying, oh, how can you think your books are crap? And how can you think this? And how can you think that? And they were really lovely and said really affirming things. But I was embarrassed because I thought I didn't mean for it to be some big revelation. That's how I mostly feel. And what was funny was other writers said, oh my God, you feel that way too after all the books you've written? Yes, because I still haven't got mastery. And I often feel I'm still learning. And that's why I feel I don't have the right one really to judge other people's books. I either enjoy them or I in varying levels, or I don't. My agent won't allow me to read other people's manuscripts that haven't been published. There's all sorts of legal dangers with that, as well as anything else. So, but also I don't feel unqualified. How do I know if your book's good enough to be published? I'm not a publisher. I'm just a writer. And I don't know. I just feel, because I'm constantly in that process of learning, I don't have the right to give people advice either. I seek it still, So, I think that's an ongoing process too. And I worry that, look, I want to keep learning till I die. Because when you've mastered something, or when you feel you've mastered something, is it time to move on to something else?
Maybe.
Yeah. Do we ever really master anything? I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't think mastery means that. I don't think mastery means perfection.
Okay. Yes, fair point. Yes. Okay. You're just really good at it.
Yeah. Okay. So if I were to think about the decades I spent trying to get a technique that would allow me to express music however I felt it, as opposed to being limited by what my technique could allow, it took me decades. And finally, within the scope of my own voice, and you can only work with what you've got, right? But I felt like, yes, I have mastered technique now, and I can do what I want to do, or express the music as I feel it, as opposed to compromising the expression for lack of a complete enough technique. And that's not to say that I wouldn't keep working on it. And I wouldn't keep, just like, you look at Roger Federer, right up until his last match, he was still picking out the little things that he thought, I can improve that a little bit. I can improve that a little. I might be able to tweak that. And as your body changes, as for you, Karen, I imagine, the readers who've been with you, who you fear kind of failing, you feel
might
failing
disappoint
on their or disappointing. I imagine they grow with you too through reading, so it's kind of, I just wonder, when we've found a voice and we don't want to disappoint, it's almost like saying maybe we're all growing together. What am I trying to say?
No, I
Perhaps
know what you're saying. Yeah, I have to allow them. I mean, and readers are generous. They really are. But I've also been in that situation where I've read an author's, say, 10 books, and I get to their 11th and I think, where are you? What have you done? You know, and I feel disappointed. And I guess so I would never tell them. And I don't utter it publicly either. No, that's not true. I did with one review, but I did it really generously.
Yeah.
And subsequently, the book after that, well, all the books after that have been absolutely sensational. I won't say who the author is, except to say that they're hugely famous, and my review meant nothing. You know what I mean? No, seriously. They are so world famous, and you know, got literally millions of readers, and that's just it. You just shouldn't. That if you're going to criticize any writer, just do it to one of them where, you know, one lost sale won't matter. But mind you, it might, you know, they might
That's
be
the
like
thing.
me and see that one.
Yes, chances are, right? You know.
Who's that damn Aussie chick? Who does she think she is? Yeah. So,
oh wow, okay. She really nailed my fear there. Okay, she was right. Okay, that's an indication that maybe. I mean, who knows? But yeah,
knows. Yeah. No, but I did it generously and I did it constructively because, again, it was with a body of knowledge of her oeuvre. Oh, I've just revealed it was a female author, and also reading in that genre very, very heavily. It's one of my favorite go-to genres. I'll say it's crime. I love crime books. Really good crime book. Yeah.
So tell me, when you're coming up with a new book, I don't even know how it happens, so I don't know the words to use. When a new book is kind of germinating.
Oh, that's lovely. Oh, I like that. I water it lots.
How do you find your way into it? Or is that kind of a romantic way of looking at it? Is it just a matter of sitting down and thinking, right, I'm going to write however many words today? And I mean, what's your process? Well,
that is such a great, do you know what? Okay, when they're two separate questions in a way, because my process is very different to how I come up with the books. Okay, I'll tell you a funny story. When I'd written my historical fantasies, and the last one I did, which I believe they're being republished this year, which is really exciting. But so they were from quite a few years ago, and I started to write another adult fantasy, and I sent the first few chapters to my agent, and she's wonderful, and she phones me up, right? And she says, Karen, it's really, the writing's beautiful. The story, I can tell, will be fabulous, but I hate the main character. What a stupid bitch. Why did she leave the baby in the car? Anyway, it's more complex than that. But anyway, I was so taken aback. And she said, look, the way you write the history is beautiful. She said, forget the fantasy, Karen. Just write your history. You love your history. Why don't you write a historical fiction? So I was feeling quite despondent this day, and my sister arrived from Sydney, and I took her to a very famous bar on the waterfront here in Hobart and to do a whiskey tasting. And I'd done it not so long ago. You get a little flight of all these different whiskies. And I said to her and a friend who was over from America, you guys do it. I'll be designated walker, because we could walk down from where I live. And so they were having it. And I was listening to this husky-voiced girl give her talk on whiskey. And I don't know why. It was like you were saying when you go off on a tangent, you know, and my brain's wandering all over the place. I'm looking around this bar and I'm watching her, and she's behind beer taps, while she's talking about the whiskey. And I remember thinking, you know, it's funny, isn't it? You only ever see male brewers around, but somewhere in my memory, I remember that females used to do all the brewing. And I said, Bex, because that was her name. I said, Bex, isn't it the case that women used to always be the brewers? And she said, yeah, I think it was, Karen. Anyway, suddenly this whole story started to pour into my head. I didn't hear anything else that was said. Didn't notice my sister and a friend were getting really cup shot and really drunk. And they staggered out of there. And all I could do, I turned to my sister and said, I've just had the best idea for a novel. So that's how that came about, The Brewer's Tale. And that then involved a whole lot of research. So I knew how it began and I knew how it ended. That was all I knew. That's all I ever know. And then my process is pretty much the same for every novel. I take it very, very seriously. I dress for work every day. So don't always wear makeup or anything, but I don't write in my pajamas. I write here where you see me in front of the computer. I have 2 screens now. I used to only have one big one, but I've subsequently moved to 2 screens. And I work for 6 to 8 hours every day. And I try to have a word limit that I work to, but sometimes I get there and sometimes I surpass it. And I've learned not to beat myself up when I don't make it. And then the next day I go back and I reread what I wrote the day before. And sometimes it's utter rubbish and it ends up mostly getting deleted. And sometimes I go, wow, did I write that? Hope I can do it again today. And yeah, and so gradually the novel evolves. But as I said, I guess I get to know the characters as I write. I have an idea of what I want them to be. I'm finding that harder as I get older, I think, because you're quite naive when you start writing, even though you've read loads and that. And I realise my backstories, I have to know them better, of my characters, but probably I'm worrying about that too much. You know, because we meet a person like we meet, I don't know your backstory, you only know bits of mine. You know, well, I know a bit of yours too, but we don't understand all our complexities. And you don't always need to reveal those in a book either. I think when you present someone in a particular way, it's lovely for the reader to be given that scope to imagine some of the background as well.
Yes.
So there's the difference between, I think it was Roland Barthes used to call a readerly and a writerly text. And I guess what that means is a readerly text, I think this is the right way to do it, is one where the reader's allowed to imagine things. It's where maybe you don't completely reveal what happens to a minor character, so the reader's allowed to maybe take that off the page and think about what might have happened, or, like I said, more complex things about a person's background. The suggestions will be there to allow you to think. A writerly text, whereas everything's sort of done, all the work's done for you. I think in publishing and in writing, we call it the difference between show and tell. You're discouraged from telling as a writer, you're encouraged to show. And an example of that is if I said to you, as she walked into the room, her red dress swirled around her ankles. How tall was she, Sally? Was she tall or short?
In my mind, she's tall.
Right. What colour hair?
Black.
Right. Was she coming from home or from work?
From home.
What colour were her shoes?
Red.
Yeah. See, I didn't need to do any of that for you. So, whereas if I'd written the tall woman with the red shoes had just come from work because she, you know, that's telling. You don't need to do it. Yeah.
Yeah. You know, you take me back, Karen, to when I was a kid, and you know that shift from storybooks to more words and bigger chapters, and you know that exciting sort of shift. And I remember going through a phase where I felt really irritated by there being illustrations, because I felt like it took away my you know, sort of freedom to imagine.
Yeah, I know what you mean. And it's also, isn't it that transition from children's book to adult books? Adult books didn't have pictures. You know? I know what you mean, though. And yes, I'm really thingy. I don't like full faces on my book covers. There's been a couple of exceptions, and they've been outstanding, I have to say. But I get why a lot of publishers, for example, put the backs of women or side-on views. And again, that's showing, not telling, because we all sort of imagine what the hero or heroine looks like. And I know that's why a lot of the erotic fiction and the complete opposite, and even the romantic fiction, have the beautiful bare-chested men or the glorious young perfect women, you know, on the covers. And that you know, I get that too. That works for that genre as well. But yeah, I prefer not to have that.
Yeah. Oh, that's wonderful. Show as opposed
don't tell,
to
or writerly and readerly text.
Writerly and readerly.
Yeah.
That's do you feel like you get to know yourself better as you're getting to know your characters?
Oh, wow. I think you must, because you explore, you plume the depths of human nature. And because I sometimes write about real historical figures, well, I always have real historical figures in my book, but I have to imagine what they must have been like as human beings on the basis of what we know about them in history. So I always describe it as putting creative flesh on history's dry bones. And but you give these people that you read about in 2 dimensions on the page, 3 dimensions, you give them emotions and dialogue, and some of them we've got their letters, their poems, their artwork. That's quite wonderful, and it gives you scope and you can really dive in. But yeah, I think I do get to know myself better. But I wish it improved me. I wish I could say that happened. But
it doesn't. That's the thing we don't know. We're us.
Exactly. I am what I am, as Papa used to say. But I think it makes me more tolerant and understanding. I like to think I've always had those levels at certain things, but stupidity is hard to tolerate when it's willful ignorance. I mean, and I'm not talking about lack of education or anything like that. I'm talking about other kinds of stupidities or ignorance, and that's hard. But I like to think the more I read and the more I learn, I still don't like it, but I come to understand where it arises from, and that does make you more tolerant. Yeah. So
and gosh, we're taking what wonderful leaps here. So willful no, I love it. It's great. Willful stupidity. How do we know that it's willful in somebody else?
Well, I think it's because it's what we also call confirmation bias. And it's so easy to do in these days, where people only seek out knowledge that confirms their own beliefs.
Right. Okay.
Part of the thing about learning is actually going to places that challenge what you think and feel, and looking. And that's where, rather than opinion, you do go to experts. Don't just read some wanker who writes something about vaccines or climate change that has no basis in fact, or draws on a study that was done by 4 scientists out of 400,000 and goes against what the other 96% said, or whatever, you know what I mean? And that's where, but again, that's willful ignorance or willful stupidity. But I also see why it happens, because that's fear. And remember, I said part of courage is to acknowledge your fear and push through it and go with it, but still go ahead. And I mean, anger comes from fear often too. People get angry because they're really fundamentally afraid, and it might be even afraid of their own emotions and losing control. But so I think that's what I mean by willful stupidity, that just refusal, that stubbornness to see someone else's point of view, even when it's someone who's spent 10 years honing something, or 20 years or 30 years, and written hundreds of papers and been out there. People don't believe David Attenborough, don't disbelieve David Attenborough, when he tells us certain things. And I wonder sometimes it's because his manner of the telling is so beautiful and so beguiling and compelling, but it's also, a truth telling. And if we turn our eyes to the truth, then we're living a falsehood, and that concerns me deeply.
Yeah. I was just reminded of something that you said when we first were chatting before we actually hit record. And it's that sense as we get older. I was just thinking of Attenborough and his extraordinary contribution. And he's an elderly man now.
Yes.
And we were referring to that sense of feeling diminished as we get older. And I've been actually speaking to a few of my older friends about this recently. And I thought it was a female thing, but it's not.
No.
It happens to men as well.
Yeah. They're still given status, and they're accorded wisdom that I think is slower to come to women. I mean, one of the people I respected most in my life was my grandmother. She survived the Holocaust. She came here with nothing, really worked hard and made an amazing life. And she was educated. Well, she gave herself a really fantastic education, spoke 5 languages. She was just an extraordinary woman. But she also noted that, how difficult it was to age as a woman. And I often say to my friends, I love getting older. I hate aging. And I had a milestone birthday last year. I turned 60. And I've noticed that diminishing, how you're literally overlooked in certain spaces. And it's quite confronting. And, you've got to lose your ego a little bit, or maybe we shouldn't. And maybe we need to stand up and be counted. And I remember reading an article that a friend sent just before Christmas. I think it was in the conversation, and it said, you know, when you're spending time with your older relatives at Christmas, interview them like an anthropologist. And I thought, oh, that's a bit corny, you know, and then I read it and I got what they meant. They meant that so often we just take older people for granted and we don't actually talk to them and find out how interesting and rich and fascinating their lives were and all the different things they've done. Now, I've been doing that for a while now, so this was not new to me. And part of that is because my biggest regret is I didn't do it earlier and I didn't find out more about my grandmother and my own mother too, who died quite some time ago now, because she also had an extraordinary life and was an immigrant and everything. And I just think I wish I'd done that, being the anthropologist this person talked about. And I think that programs like on the ABC, you know, that old people's home for 4-year-olds and old people's home for teenagers, they're just beautiful, beautiful shows. And they really show how we tend to live in silos in certain ages in our society, but it's so important to build bridges. And part of the way to do that is through dialogue and talking and communicating and maybe interviewing older people like anthropologists. But I don't know whether this invisibility is because we accept it when we're older. We take that for granted, and maybe we've got to stop. And what's lovely is more and more in society now, you are seeing older men and women who are still vital, amazing contributors, like David Attenborough, who's in his 90s, I believe. You know, so hopefully that's going to change too, because I know now when I was in my late teens, 20s, I thought when I turned 40, I'd have a perm and purple hair. And I don't mean the fabulous, vibrant purple that some people men and women walk around with today. I mean that wishy-washy, you know, it's still beautiful, that rinse. Lilac, the rinse, that's right. And I'd wear muumuus and, you know, and here I am at 60, you know, and nothing like that. And I hope I'm never like that. For me, I mean, some people might want that, and you do that. Again, men and women, if you want to have that lilac rinse and wear muumuus, you go for it. But yeah, I love that. See, that's about choice, going back to choice. You know, when, again, I am white and middle class, so I have a lot more choice. I have an education. I'm very fortunate, you know. I haven't always had a good life. I've done it tough too, but not it's all relative. But now I have that freedom to make those choices. Yeah. And hell, I'm not wearing a muumuu.
Yeah. You know, a couple of years ago, I went to train as a cameleer in the Simpson Desert, right? I was a trainee cameleer.
Wow.
And I remember saying to my friend who helped facilitate this experience, who's an amazing adventurer, explorer, just curious person. She's just incredible. Anyway, I said to her, oh, I'm just not as fit as I used to be. And I just don't know. And here was I in my late 40s. And she said, Sal, our oldest cameleer just turned 100. And I thought, well, that changes the parameters here a bit.
Wow. Yeah. Well, gosh, that's amazing.
Yeah. And I thought, you know, our perceptions of ourselves as we age, you know, our ideas around aging shape the way we age, shape what we do. I mean, of course, our body's not going to, you know, work in the same way as when we're 20, when we're 80, of course. But, you know, there's all that research around this now, the people who have positive perceptions of aging, who think of, you know, wiry people, wisdom, you know, energy and not caring what people think, you know, positive sorts of ideas around aging, they tend to age like that.
Yeah, it's so true. It's so true. And, you know, and surround yourself by people of all ages. And I have to say, where I live, and I've lived in lots of places in Australia and overseas for a bit too, I have never lived anywhere where age to a degree doesn't matter as much. Now, when I was talking about being invisible and being overlooked, it mostly doesn't happen in the place I live, Hobart. And Tasmania, it is just incredible. I can go out into a restaurant. I haven't been to a nightclub for a long time, but a pub or anything. And we own down here, my husband and I, a brewery distillery. And now maybe it's because I'm the old chick behind the bar when I call beers, but people are lovely, whether they're 18 or 88, you know, and just so accommodating. And I see groups of people sitting together of all ages, and that keeps you vital and engaged and interested. And I'm not interested in being young again, but it's again what I said, but young at heart in that desire to learn and have new experiences. That's probably what I mean by young at heart. But gosh, we should invent a new phrase and just say being, I don't know, being older at heart and still wanting to embrace all that too, but age appropriately, as in don't go and break your back or your legs or or your liver, ruin your liver. Yeah.
My grandmother was so funny talking about, you know, and she was in her 80s and she'd talk about the old girls at tennis. And she was actually older than the old girls she was talking about.
My grandmother did Meals on Wheels at a Jewish people's home in Sydney, and that was when she was in her 80s, and she invited me to go with her a few times. And some of the people she was serving meals to were young, were younger than her. And yet you would never have known my grandmother was the age she was. She was just incredible up until the end, you know.
And for someone who lived through what she lived through, I just by chance read Viktor Frankl's 3 lectures just following, you know, within months, not even a year after his liberation from, it wasn't Auschwitz, it was not Birkenau, it was Buchenwald, I think.
Buchenwald, which is where my great-grandparents were. Well, my great-grandfather died there. Yeah.
Right. And
no, sorry, he didn't. He died in Theresienstadt. Him and my great uncle were interred in Buchenwald before they were, my great grandmother were moved to Theresienstadt where they died. Right. But yes, that was In Search of Meaning, isn't that the book In Search of Meaning? Is that
no? This is so
it's
different, and I think it was only published for the first time a couple of years ago. But it's the 3 lectures that he gave. He may already, I'm not sure if he'd already written the book or if the book happened later, but it's called Say Yes to Life in Spite of Everything.
Okay, I'm going to write that down. Say Yes to Life in Spite of Everything. Thank you.
Yeah. And, you know, just it fascinated me. What I hadn't realized was that when he was a student counsellor, before the Holocaust happened, he was already putting together suicide prevention programs for the students, because even back then, I thought there was so much more pressure on students now, but even back then in the 1930s, students would take their lives when they didn't get the exam results that they wanted. And he put together these programs. And so his whole experience following that actually, the ideas weren't from his experience in Auschwitz. They came in the concentration camps. They came from before then. But his whole experience through that period then, his ability to keep his mind in a place where he could cope with those experiences, what do I even mean by that? But what an incredible person,
extraordinary human being, yeah.
And I think and he's not the only one. Look at your grandmother, who then went on to be of service to other people. And I'm going to reread them. They're those sorts of lectures. But yeah, what were you about to say, Karen?
No, I was saying his logotherapy that he came up with. That's I think how he explained how he was able to, I guess, cope. I don't know what other word to use.
Yes.
With what the dreadful situation.
And his way of sort of describing that was it's a therapy of sort of finding meaning.
Yeah, and words,
isn't it?
Through words, and the words, carry weight. Yeah.
Just to move away from, we could go off on a very rich.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering 2 things. Back to your writing. When you, firstly, do you consciously do anything to cultivate your imagination, or does it just happen because of the way you look at the world? So there's that question. And also, if you sit down for your 6 or 8 hours, I think you said 8 hours at the desk, and you just don't feel inspired at all, then what do you do?
Wow. Okay. I think life cultivates your imagination, and certainly reading other people's books, whether they're non-fiction or fiction. I read the papers. I love interacting with other people, not when I'm working. I'm very antisocial, but when there's a sort of joke in the family that if a tradesperson comes to the house, or even the post person, they have to sort of Karen, because
Forget about the dogs. Forget about the poodles. Watch out for Karen.
And my husband will sometimes say, Karen, they're on the clock. So sometimes I do crave human company. Yeah, my poor dogs get it. For my 2 Bichons, sorry, there's 2 down there, and the Labradoodles that work with my husband, and the 2 cats are around. So we've got 5 fur babies. But that's other people. I find them endlessly fascinating, and relationships endlessly fascinating, whether it's between a politician and their constituents, whether it's in a marriage, a friendship, motherhood and fatherhood, kids and parents, all that, absolutely fascinating. So I think I'm a bit like a bowerbird or a sponge. I just soak it all up. And look, all the beautiful narrative music, I find inspiration. I listen to music as I write. Of the era I'm writing in. So at the moment, because I'm copy editing a book in the 1600s, I'm listening to a lot of Purcell and people like that. And then artwork, all that sort of poetry. But then, okay, you're talking about essentially writer's block, aren't you? If I sit down and nothing comes.
Look, honestly, I wasn't thinking of it in those terms.
Only because I don't get it. I don't get it.
Well, I mean, I wasn't.
No, do you know what I've worked out? And that's not because I'm exceptional or anything like that. It's because, and it's not because my imagination is this endless well or cornucopia that just keeps renewing itself. I realize when I can't write, or when the words, and sometimes it's like squeezing bloody toothpaste out of an empty tube, it's really hard to get anything. I've gone in the wrong direction. So I go back a few chapters, or even a few words or lines, if it's just the beginning of a book. Usually I can get the beginning down quite quickly because I've been thinking about it for so long. And then just, kickstart again. So sometimes my delete file, I have a delete file for every book, is as long as the finished product. So the delete file for the book that's coming out this year is over 100,000 words.
Is it longer than the book itself?
No. I don't want to say how long the book is. It's a bloody opus. I'm trying to cut words out now.
And so it's coming out late this year. Are you able
July,
in July? Okay. Are you able to tell us anything else about it?
Yeah. I can tell you. And I'll be able to share the cover soon. I've seen a draft cover, and it is bloody awesome. I thought The Good Wife of Bath. They couldn't beat that, but they got the same designer, and she's Michaela Alciano, I think her surname is. She's just extraordinary. I burst into tears when I saw it. Anyway, it's called The Escapades of Tribulation Johnson, and you'll appreciate this because it's set around Restoration theatre. So it's about when actresses were first on the stage in England, because up until Charles II came back to the throne in 1660, women were not allowed to perform. Men always played female roles. Yeah. This book starts in 1679. So by now, women have been on the stage for 19 years. And it's about a young woman named Tribulation Johnson, who for various reasons is forced to go to London and live with a cousin she's never met. Her cousin happens to be the infamous playwright, who's a real historical figure, called Aphra Behn. And Aphra Behn is one of those women who was sort of elided from history for centuries and criticised and disparaged and put down even when she was at the height of her career. She was the first female playwright to write, English playwright to write for money, to write for bread. And yet, again, she was excluded. She also really wrote the first English novel probably around 30 to 40 years before, was it Daniel Defoe or Jonathan Swift acclaimed as the first novelist. So she actually did, and she was an abolitionist and just this amazing woman. And Yeah. So there's lots of, she was a spy, she was a pamphleteer, she was all
Wow.
sorts of things. Yeah. So anyway, about
Afra Ben.
Afra Ben, isn't it a great name?
AFRABEN. Oh,
APHRABEHN. Yeah.
oh,
But her maiden name was Johnson, hence the connection to tribulation. So it's about
okay.
them, and it's about how tribulation is taken under Afra's wing at a time in England when a thing called the Popish plot, which was true, was at its height. And that was when this incredibly awful human being named Titus Oates, you can't make these names up, can you? Titus Oates, who was a former priest who invented this plot whereby he said that all these Catholics, and he was a former priest, so they thought he knows. He said there was this plot to assassinate the king, and he started pointing the finger at all these quite powerful Catholic people. And all these non-Catholics, Protestants, got behind him because they saw it as a swift way to get rid of potential political rivals. So it was a time of executions, of fear, of real tragedy. And during this, what is it? The play must go on. So the show must go on. So it's sort of along those lines. Yeah.
Oh, goody. That just, wow. That sounds so exciting, so gripping.
I
And
hope so. I've loved writing it. I've absolutely loved writing it. Yeah.
how much time do you spend researching as opposed to writing, getting your, story down?
Yeah, I usually, because they all overlap. So, for example, I'm doing a copy edit, and a copy edit's the last time I've already done an edit with a proper editor. A copy edit's when it comes back, and it's mainly grammatical, but also your last chance to make any major changes, because then it goes to page proofs. So even while I was waiting, I'd already started writing my next book. So while I'm doing the finishing touches of this one, I was already finishing the research for my next book, which is called Kindred Spirits.
Yeah.
And it's about whiskey smuggling in Scotland, which was huge during the late 1700s and the Highland clearances. So that's a fascinating piece of history, and women's role in that, because they're often not spoken about, but they were very much part of it. So a great learning curve for that too. So I spent about 2 years researching, and then the writing begins. So I have to have this book, Tribulation Johnson, comes out in July. I have to submit the manuscript for Kindred Spirits in September this year. So I've got probably about a sixth of that book written. So I'll go straight back into it as soon as Tribulation Johnson goes back to the publisher. Yeah. So they're always overlapping. Yeah. I already know what I want the book after that to be. So,
oh, really?
Yeah. Again, inspiration, reading a newspaper article of all things. I went, oh my God, I didn't know about that. Just some line that was a throwaway line in a newspaper article. So I went in a deep dive down that rabbit hole and found something really interesting. Yeah.
Gosh, that's my assumption had that when you're working on one book, that's the only world you could inhabit. But I suppose when you're at different stages with different stories, and you know each of the stories so well and the characters so well, you can just skip.
I can only move on when I know them well. I couldn't start writing or thinking about Kindred Spirits, even the research, until I really had done a very early first draft of Tribulation Johnson. Right. And even then I kept fiddling with it because it was far too long, and there were parts I wasn't quite happy with. So I had to keep putting down the Scottish research, because again, that's 100 years. Like I keep saying I'm so foolish. I keep writing books in completely different periods. And I just wish I could just stick to one period and know it really well. But I get too curious about something and have to explore. Yeah.
Yeah, just following your curiosity. I think it's absolutely wonderful. And I'm so grateful to you, Karen, for sharing all your thoughts and your ideas and you're going to hate me saying this. You're inspiring the way curiosity leads you. And not only that, but the work ethic, the discipline involved, the, knowing where to go when you hit an obstacle or a barrier. I've even though I didn't think of, not being able to come up with inspiration, I didn't think of that as writer's block, but just your understanding of what that is for you. It's actually a signpost that you're going in the wrong direction.
Lovely way to put it, a signpost. I mean, I that's not to say I don't have days where I just don't want to get out of bed and I'm really despondent. Like I said, I've been feeling, I keep getting waves of dreadful doubt, which can be really soul crushing. And, anyone who's had depression before, and which I have had a few times, knows what that's like. And I work really hard to, I guess, wade my way out of that quicksand of malaise and sadness, and as I say, crippling self-doubt. But you do get there, and part of the reason you do that is, again, I'm not on my own. I have an amazing family and support network of friends and lovely people like you who are interested in what I do and remind me there's a bigger world out there, because it's very solitary, isn't it? This kind of work. Yeah,
absolutely. And so obviously, where I will post. People who are listening to this as a podcast, I will be posting some, websites and ways you can follow Karen in the body of the copy here. But Karen, for people who are listening, can you what's your main website?
Oh, do you know what? It's not as up to date as it should be. I've had problems with it. I need a new web person.
Or Facebook? Is it your Facebook
Facebook's
page?
better. Facebook author page. It's just Karen Brooks author page.
Okay.
Yeah. And then I'm on Instagram as, I think it's kbrooks1662. You know what? Because Karen Brooks is such a boring name, you have to come up with all these other tags and bits and bobs because there's many of us out there.
Yeah. Well, Sally Wilson's are similar.
Great name.
But really, Karen, you've been so generous and also, allowing us to get a sense of just your humanness, your beingness. You're very courageous and I appreciate it. And I know listeners and watchers will be too. So thank you again, Karen.
No, thank you. So thank you for your wonderful questions, for asking me to be here and, giving me the time. It's lovely. And thank you to your listeners and watchers too. Yeah.
Yes. Thank you, listeners and watchers, for joining us. And we'll look forward to being with you on the waves next time. Thanks, everyone. Bye. Bye, Karen.
Bye.